here's this chemical, we use it for this. This is what we're going to do today now that we're in decontam for the day. Here is the wipes that we use for our tabletops for prep and pack. You're kind of introduced to the chemicals as you meet them. I mean, that's the big thing. Is like as you meet them, as they're brought into your repertoire of what you're learning in sterile processing, that's just a lot of how people learn chemicals, really.
What if one conversation could save a life? What if one new process or new product could save a patient from surgical harm? Broadcasting from a hospital basement near you, you are listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the global voice of sterile processing. Each week we spotlight the best practices, products and people from around the world who are disrupting our profession and helping you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Join us as we have the kinds of conversation that matter and give our industry the kind of voice that it deserves. Nyt on aika mennä puhdastakin puhtaammaksi. And now it's time to go beyond clean.
This week on Beyond Clean, we speak with Ken Batton, educator at Penn State Health, and he's got a few more titles we'll get into when we start the interview, Hank, but he's local to you and I, and you're a new local, I'll put it that way, but he's local to you and I, and we've known him because he's been very active on social media, especially LinkedIn, sharing content, asking questions, getting involved in the dialogue. And there's no better way to get attention from the team at Beyond Clean than to engage with the posts that are going out on social, giving feedback and contributing to the sterile processing conversation. And today, we're going to be taking the final part of this discussion around chemicals this season, but putting an educator's spin on it through the lens of Ken and his role as an educator.
That's right, Justin. Ken's name and face is not going to be unfamiliar to a lot of Beyond Clean folks because he's recently been on a couple of panel discussions, including a low temperature sterilization panel discussions, and I think also a pre-treatment discussion that we had a couple of weeks ago. So he's all up in the chemicals, which again doesn't surprise us that we would invite him to finish off this season on the Chemical Epicenter, and in particular to bring us home on applying the education surrounding chemicals and safe chemical use. So really looking forward to the discussion today with Ken.
All right, we're going to be right back. Ken Batton, educator at Penn State Health, after a short break. I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Hank Walsh.
From the 17 studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Joining us now is Ken Batton, educator at Penn State Health and newly elected president of CASP, which is a HSPA chapter here in Pennsylvania, where Hank and I both reside. And I've been a pretty active member in CASP in the past, and I'm looking forward to what is coming up here under your leadership, Ken. And then also you're on the Beyond Clean advisory group as well. So Pennsylvania representing on this episode of Beyond Clean. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, not a problem. Glad I could be here.
All right, Ken, so why don't you just start by telling a little bit about yourself to the audience, and specifically maybe what, really brought you into sterile processing and your current role as educator. And if there's time, I guess we'd get into the Beyond Clean advisory group and the presidency as well.
No, that's not a problem. So my career in sterile processing has been rather short. I think I'm a little over 6 years now. I started in the operating room while I was there. I did a little bit of training in sterile processing to get a good understanding. I kind of fell in love with it there. Some things moved around, ended up working full time with sterile processing, eventually moved down to Pennsylvania. I started at a little community hospital there. Our management was ran by the operating room. We had no higher ups for sterile processing. So we all got together and decided, hey, I think we need our own supervisor, manager kind of thing. OR was all for that. So I eventually applied for that. I jumped into the role of manager, supervisor, probably within 3 years of being in sterile processing. At that point, I held CRCST, CIS, CHL. So I thought I was ready. I wasn't, but I made my way through it. Now I'm here where I'm at Penn State, currently the educator. I absolutely love educating. Knowledge and, the education part of sterile processing is where I feel I strive. So I feel like I'm doing pretty good here.
Excellent. And why don't we talk a little bit about CASP as well and the presidency and your experience with the chapter. As we record this, we are coming off less than 24 hours. Well, I guess a little more than 24 hours, but we just had Damian Berg and Hank Balch talking about the collaboration and really the responsibility to the industry that Beyond Clean and HSPA have and plans for working more collaboratively moving forward. But, this is a great example, is supporting local chapters. So tell us a little bit about your chapter.
So CASP is Central PA's old Isham, now HSPA's Central Pennsylvania's chapter. We're a small chapter. We don't have too many. For the past few years, our president and vice president have been running an awesome organization. Unfortunately, they took some good roles for themselves to move forward in sterile processing, and the chapter was kind of left leaderless at that point. And we had a couple good people, and I decided to step up and take on the presidency, and we're looking for more members. We're looking forward to the person-to-person, face-to-face, if we can get it this year, if it's possible. Unfortunately, COVID's kind of made everything virtual at this point, but we're hoping to get that chapter back up and running. So,
when I was really active, and you're right, not having that face-to-face, I think has been hard for a lot of chapters, which is why, I think Beyond Clean can be a big support and why we're working with HSPA around that. But I remember CASP won Small Chapter of the Year something like 2 out of 3 years in the early to mid 2010s. Is that how you say that? I'm not sure. And it was one of the best regional conferences put on. I remember we had people coming in to Central PA from New York and Delaware and Maryland, and we even had some people drive up from Virginia. The guest lineup was always so strong. And so
was it because you were one of the speakers, Justin? Is that
I don't even know. Here's what's funny, Hank. I spoke at a lot of conferences.
Big build up, and I happen to be one of the educators during that time.
I'm going to be honest with you. I think I only did one presentation at any of the conferences, and I was probably involved in the development of at least 5 or 6. So good question, Hank.
My first one, Justin, was there.
Oh, okay. See, there you go. You're the hook. You brought Ken into the fold, Justin. There you go. The connection's made.
I'm certain that's not the case. All right, Ken. So that was great, though. I applaud you for stepping up. And I mean, Hank probably has got something to add here, having been a past president and gotten 2 chapters off the ground himself.
The big thing that I wanted to add to this conversation actually came out of a conversation that I had with Damian Berg prior to that interview that just aired. It's the need for succession planning for our chapter leaders, because it's hard enough to be a leader as it is, everything going smoothly. But when those chapter presidents and vice presidents move on, as you said, Ken, if there's no one in line with exposure, experience, like mentorship on just how to run a chapter, that is like a gigantic shoes, I guess you should say, to step into if you've just never done it before.
Especially following the president.
Right.
Especially following the president that I am.
Yeah,
right now.
Right. Yeah, because there's even that kind of mental part too. He's like, well, how can I do what that person did? Because I don't know the people they know. I don't have the experience they had, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. That's why it's so critical. I just want to encourage you, but also advocate anybody else who's listening. If you are currently a chapter leader, start right now looking around. I'm not saying pick your replacement. That's not what succession planning is. I'm saying be thoughtful about who is out there active and engaged, or maybe not as active as they could be. Pull them in a little closer and say, hey, let's get a group of folks that if something happened to me tomorrow, at least one of y'all would be capable and willing to step up and immediately fill that gap. And I think that's a very important step that has not been emphasized as much in our chapters around the country, but I want folks to start talking about it more, and I'm going to start talking about it more myself. So The topic, though, of this interview is actually education, which is one of the reasons that we're talking to you, Ken. And it's about educating around this chemical conversation. We've had a lot of very deep scientific, technical interviews this season that have gone very, very well. But part of Beyond Clean and the whole vision that we have is, okay, now what? What do we do with this information? How do we actually hardwire this in real life sterile processing? So I want to start here. If you had a brand new employee come off the street, no experience in any prior sterile processing department, they're brand new, they show up. As an educator, where do you start with them on this topic of introducing them to and familiarizing them with chemicals in our department and in our workflow?
So taking a technician in off the street, I've done it a few times, not necessarily in an educator role. I've done it in a manager role. A little bit different at that point in different facilities that I was at. I've seen it both ways. I think back to how I was introduced to chemicals, and a lot of what I've noticed is you're not really introduced to all of them at once. You're just kind of like, okay, here's this chemical. We use it for this. This is what we're going to do today now that we're in decontam for today. Here is the wipes that we use for our tabletops for prep and pack. You're kind of introduced to the chemicals as you meet them. I mean, that's the big thing. It's like as you meet them, as they're brought into your repertoire of what you're learning in sterile processing, that's just a lot of how people learn chemicals, really. One thing that I'm loving about my new job is we actually have a trainee program that we follow the book. We're doing chapter by chapter. And one thing that I'm starting to emphasize with the chemicals is as we're learning something in the book before you're even hitting it in the department, like this is what the chemical is. The books, the thing I love about them is they preach safety about these chemicals. And that's, we hear a lot about, okay, this chemical will turn you blue if you let it touch your skin. Make sure you wear gloves. Okay, but why is it turning your skin blue? Is it going to harm you? Is it going to burn you? They don't teach those things about these chemicals. So a lot of what I do is as they're reading the book and as we come across it, I'm teaching them right then as they're learning it, so it sticks.
Yeah, it's that context, right? It's, hey, this is where you're going to encounter this chemical. You're probably not going to see a detergent on the clean side in any scenario. And you're probably not going to see a sterilant in decontam if everything's working the way that it should. So yeah, that's a great point. Now, when you say the book, I just want to make sure that everybody is clear on what you're referencing. What do you mean when you say that?
Certification book. Currently here, not to do a plug, but we utilize HSPA.
That's all right. You got a year's grace period for pronouncing that acronym. That's what Damien and I agreed on the other day. It's just going to take us a while. Okay.
Yes, HSPA. We utilize their book, the old Isham book, and, we go through the chapters. That's what we're utilizing. We have plenty of CBSPD here, so we're currently using that book for our trainee program. And as we're hitting our disinfection chapter, we're talking about our high level disinfection, low levels. We're talking about our sterilants when it rolls into low temp, all the different chemicals we're using. So as we're hitting that chapter, that's when we're talking about those chemicals.
Great. We talk and have talked a fair amount about chemical safety on the Beyond Clean podcast in the past, both on just the straight educational episodes, also on a couple of vendor spotlights. I'm thinking in particular with the Chem DAC team, David Hilliker. But you can never talk enough about chemical safety, I think, in particular for these new folks, because depending on what your background is, if you're coming from retail or like the supermarket, like I did, I came from Walmart, was my previous job. There's not a lot that can hurt you at Walmart unless you're like running the forklift like I was and you're not paying attention in the back. Like that can hurt you. But in sterile processing, there's a lot of ways that you can get injured just with chemicals. You're not talking about all the other equipment or the sharps exposures and everything else. So I do want to applaud you and encourage those other educators out there that's got to be front loaded in education, not just how to use, not just the compliance side of it, not just where it is process wise, everything else, but hey, this is how this thing can hurt you. And this is what you need to do to not get hurt. Do you have anything else to add about that topic?
Prime example, low temp sterilization, hydrogen peroxide. You better wear your PPE. That's what I tell them. I'm like, you can look at all the social media posts. Everybody's posting all the time, got that white corrosion burn on their skin from that. That's, you have to learn the safety of these chemicals. I mean, you don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to know the inside and outs. You don't have to know every single section of the MSDS, but you need to know, okay, if I'm dealing with hydrogen peroxide, I need to be wearing my PPE. Well, most chemicals, you need to be wearing your PPE. The chemicals isn't just what we use for sterilization. COVID, now we have Purell everywhere. Sorry, not the hand sanitizer. It's everywhere.
Hey, Purell, if you're listening, you can also buy ad space on the Unclean podcast. FYI.
Sorry. But hand sanitizer is a chemical. It's flammable. It can cause skin irritation. There's a lot of things that just something that everybody thinks is a savior to us at this current moment. It's still a chemical that we regularly use. And they're everywhere. That's something that if I could stress to everybody, that your chemicals are everywhere.
I want to go back to something that you alluded to, I'm talking Texan tonight, something that you alluded to, Ken, on how you're introducing chemicals to these new employees. And I think it's very, very important because that seems to be the standard model. Frankly, because it's easier to learn that way if you can contextualize this chemical. Okay, so this is how to use this, what it does. It's very hard to just download everything from a book and then walk in and start kind of trying to connect the dots outside of that learning experience. But to teach chemicals in small chunks, it's also very easy, and I've seen, to miss a critical chemical. Because if you really sit down and list out every chemical in your entire sterile processing department, we deal with a ton. Like you just gave a great example, hand sanitizer. That is and should be on your chemical training list. But there's all kinds of other things. Anything in a bottle that can be delivered through spray, through pouring, through dilution, like all of that stuff classifies in the chemical. So I had this idea a number of years ago when I was a manager director to create a mega list of chemicals to capture everything possible in our department, and then to use that mega list as kind of a release valve out of orientation or onboarding to say no one gets released out of their first 90 days until they've been introduced to every single chemical on this mega list. And importantly, it's like we've been talking, every single safety requirement, PPE expectation for all of those chemicals, because it is so easy to miss one. And it just so happens that's the one they encounter on a Saturday night at 1 a.m. when no one else is around, and we're up a creek at that point. Have you ever encountered any kind of listing like that, or how do you overcome that potential challenge of forgetting to train someone on a particular chemical?
So I have actually ran across something like this before. I worked at a facility that didn't have regular access to an online database of MSDS. And kind of the old school trick of that was you just find the MSDS for every single chemical you have and you make a mega list for your department and you have it. And the big difference was we weren't necessarily trained on every single chemical, but we were trained to know where that list was. And that's, a double-edged sword, because having an online database of MSDS is absolutely wonderful. You can have access to just about every chemical there is, whether you use it or not. But you start throwing too many chemicals in there, you can't train, you can't be competent on every single chemical. So, I have seen something like that, but I think the training thing would absolutely be great to have for a staff in general.
You brought up one of my soapboxes, which is online databases. This is true for chemicals, also true for IFUs. That's the dead horse I usually beat, but I'm going to beat the dead horse of the online SDS database. And it's exactly what you're saying. It gives us potentially a false sense of security, because we're teaching these technicians, hey, if you ever need to look something up, just go to the database and look it up. Well, first of all, if you quiz your technicians, and I want to encourage everybody out there, manager, educator, but even just, fellow technician, let's see how your other coworkers do. Look up a particular chemical. Just grab a bottle randomly in the department and say, hey, look this up on this online database. see if they can do it, and not just look it up, but find a specific, PPE requirement, or what's the exposure. If you get exposed, what are you supposed to do? Those things are not as easy or intuitive as you may think. If you're looking up the word alcohol, for instance, you get like 20 or 30 options. Which one is it? What percentage? Like, how do you really dive into that and say, this is the chemical that's in my department? So back to your point about the mega list, I'm a big fan. Even if you have access to the database, of pulling that out and tailoring it to what's really in your department. And if you want to know, a good place to start is, what are you ordering? So like pull that financial piece and say, okay, these are all the line items that we're ordering. Now, don't take that for granted, because somehow, some way, chemicals just end up in our department sometimes. Like, where did that cascade come from in decontam? Like, who brought that in? But at least that's a start for that mega list, that you don't have to start creating it. It's from this big scavenger hunt. But yeah, like I can't echo enough that risk that we run just trusting this database that's never accessed and never trained to.
Well, it's perfect timing for this recording, Hank, honestly, because we're actually just got done talking about low temp disinfection in our training program. And something new I tried with this last class is exactly what you were just talking about, a scavenger hunt. And the way I started is, I trained them how to use the MSDS online database, as we do with everybody. And I showed them how to access what it was, but then I had them draw a chemical out of a cup. And I didn't give them the name. I told them, fluid used in Da Vinci ultrasonic, or adhesive remover over in decontam. I didn't give them names. I didn't give them anything. I told them, like, if a tech was talking to a tech, they would say, hey, that's that fluid over. They're not going to give out the actual name and everything. So I gave them the everyday list of what it would be called. And I said, next day, bring me the MSDS. And they had to go through and find the chemicals, and they 4 for 4, they got it. So,
wow.
So I'm glad that they're learning that. And, do I expect them to do it again in the future? Probably not. I hope so. But at least they're going to know where to go in case of that emergency. So, yeah, I like that idea of the scavenger hunt. And it was taken pretty well by the staff. So,
yeah, and it gets them doing something. Like, they're actually practicing what they would need to do. So, they might not necessarily, like you said, go running around pulling MSDSs all the time, but you're really preparing them for when they need the MSDS. And so having actually practiced knowing where to look, not only for the information in the database, but also where to look to find out what chemical they're looking up. That's really smart. I got to commend you on that one. And then, sometimes when you bring these people, quote, off the street, right, with little experience, a brand new SPD technician is likely to make some mistakes. And it's natural. It's part of the reason why I think having an educator is so critical. Who has the time to step back and really focus on, improving that skill set and really paying attention to a new hire or somebody who is newer on the job, who just needs to work through some of those mistakes and make sure they don't happen again. Because once the confidence thing goes, they're on a slippery slope, and you've already invested a lot of time and money into that employee. And so what are some of those mistakes that you see happen, not only from the new ones? We can start there, and I think that's the logical place to start, but even from experienced SPD techs related to, the using of these chemicals and, compliance as well.
So I have 4 errors that I think I see all the time. My first one, without a doubt, is improper dilution of chemicals. You see that all the time. Some people think, more is better, or, I have all this water, I don't need that much. It's still got bubbles on top of it. Everything's fine. And it's, that's, I would think that would probably be the number one error I would see when it comes to chemicals of any kind, is improper dilution.
And I'm really thinking detergent when you say that one.
That's the main one, detergent over in decontam. Hopefully you're not diluting anything anywhere else, which actually leads me to my next error.
Oh, great. Mixing. Excellent segue, because that's what I was getting at. I didn't want people to start thinking like, especially if we have anybody working in outpatient centers that are still using Sidex. The last thing I want them to think is that they should dilute that.
Yeah. But the next one is mixing of chemicals in general. If I have alcohol and I have prep spray, maybe they both work good together. Let's put them together and send it on its way. And, that it doesn't happen too often, but it does happen enough to where, in 6 years, I've seen it at every facility I've been at, unfortunately. And
what's the chemical that you hear about all the time? The two chemicals, just like people go to clean their bathrooms and they mix
bleach and
Clorox.
What is it?
Ammonia.
Bleach and
ammonia.
Ammonia.
I was going to say Lysol.
Yeah. I was going to say vinegar for some reason. I'm like, nobody uses vinegar in the bathroom, so I couldn't pull it together.
The only time you use vinegar is when you're making a volcano for the science fair.
Right, there we go.
Yeah. But still.
But it's toxic, right? That's the whole point.
Right.
And that creates serious toxicity. There are deaths that happen in everybody's home all the time, around the country. I just remember getting educated on that so heavily just as a kid, and growing up. But it's the same principle here. If you start mixing chemicals, you're really asking for it.
And, we have a lot of regulations on that too, which leads me again to my next one is wrong chemicals in the wrong containers or not labeled. That if you're going to be using a chemical in our department, in our, industry, it needs to be labeled. It needs to be known what you are using, because if you're an experienced tech and that bottle on my station is this, I know it's that, I've had it there for 15 years. That new tech who's working at your station for that day comes over and starts spraying it and doesn't know what exactly it is. Now you're spraying chemicals everywhere that you have no clue what's going around your department. And, that's a very serious thing, because when we start looking at Joint Commission and other organizations coming in, if you have a bottle that's not labeled or the wrong chemical or anything to that nature, that's a pretty significant finding at that point.
And number 4, because I'm keeping track here.
Yeah. So number 4 kind of goes back with number 1. It's too long and too short of use of the chemical.
Yeah.
These prime thing I could think of is the bactericidal wipes, the tuberculocidal wipes. They have a dwell time.
Dwell time. Ding, 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 ding. The D word.
Yep. And, people think, oh, you wipe it on, you dry it off, it's good. And no, that has to sit 3, 4, 5 minutes, depending on what you're using. And then you have to wipe it off again. There's a lot of things. And, a lot of people don't think of wipes as chemicals, but what's in that wipe that you're using is a chemical, and it, falls under all the same regulations as that spray and everything. It's just ease of use at that point.
Yeah, it's not makeup remover. Yeah. I'll tell you that much.
Well, it's not even just a new sterile processing tech problem. I'll tell you, during the age of COVID, I had more times out in public and, seeing folks like at a supermarket or whatever, do their little wipe down or whatever between the customers. And I see the chemicals they're using, and I'm like, there's no way that whatever you're doing is what the IFU says in terms of dwell time, because a quick wipe and then boom, right back to it when everything's still wet. I'm like, you're not killing anything. You may be making yourself feel better, but you're just kind of irritating these germs. You're not dealing with them.
Or the use of quaternary products on items that should not be having that chemical on it.
Right.
Taking hospital strength, industrial strength chemicals to your home, that's not smart. There's a reason why they're not available to the public.
We used to see that Clorox bleach hidden somewhere in a department. I haven't seen it in a long time, but, to try to get the rust off of instruments, right? They would take that powder out and, oh, this is going to be great. And then it comes out of the autoclave all purple and rusted and just crazy.
So Ken, you've highlighted a lot of common errors, all of which I agree with. And I know the list could have been longer, but we only got so much time on the show. But let's talk about how you hardwire the best practice, right? Because if we know that there are common errors like this, not only for new technicians, but honestly for experienced technicians, because all 4 of those I have seen experienced, certified technicians also not properly dilute, also not use the correct bottle or label the bottle, all of the above. So what do we do, and what do you do as an educator in particular to try to fix that process-wise and culturally in your department?
So a lot of what I do is mainly going to be in like annual competencies, just making sure everybody understands. Here recently, with COVID, you're starting to see chemicals being brought to the forefront a lot more, and people are starting to understand them more and starting to see them more. So the training in general of just making sure the technicians know what they're using, how to use it, and then on the management education part, making sure what needs to be available for them is available. Having PPE in the immediate area of chemical being used,
Yeah. Can't expect your people to wear it if they can't find it. Okay.
Yeah. Throw a pair of safety goggles right next to the bottle and just say, have them there. They see them, at least they know, okay, yeah, maybe I need to wear those splashed. I kind of alluded back a couple questions ago about make sure you wear gloves when you use this chemical so you don't turn blue, having that available. That's in reference to Cydex. That'll turn you blue in a heartbeat. But, that's a big thing that management and education can do is just, the regular education of the chemicals. We spend a lot of time focusing on inspection and steam sterilization, which if you want to get technical, steam sterilization uses a chemical too. It's just water, but it's still a chemical. We got to know about it too. We spend so much time on the big bullet points that we kind of do send the chemicals to the wayside because they do their jobs themselves. We just have to facilitate it. But having that knowledge of what they're doing and how they're doing it will help those technicians understand what they're trying to accomplish with these chemicals.
And, thinking about that annual competency point and that mega list idea that I've been just dreaming about for the last 3 or 4 years, a kind of melding between the two would be, let's just say that you have 60 chemicals on your mega list. Well, the last thing you want to do at the end of a year is sit down and like shotgun 60 chemical terms, safety, everything else to these technicians. So it would probably take good idea to divide that list by 12 and say, hopefully this math is right. 5 chemicals a month that you need to talk about and cycle through all 60 of those chemicals over the course of a year so that it's easy, it's digestible. It's almost just one chemical a week. And everybody gets exposed to this one chemical every week in our department. Ask questions, see where the PPE is, and keep that conversation to the forefront, to your point, Ken, so that it doesn't get pushed down as this thing that just kind of everyone assumes is out there, but the real focus is productivity and the real focus is communication. Yes, all those are important, but if we're hurting ourselves with chemicals, or if the chemicals are not working the way that they're designed, it doesn't matter how quickly we get the trays through. They're not going to be clean or they're not going to be sterile.
All right, Ken, great job today on the interview. Congratulations again for assuming the presidency of CASP, and I think you're going to do an amazing job. I love the fact, too, by the way, that the president is an educator, because that's really one of the primary focuses of those chapters. And I want you to know, especially because Hank and I are both very local. I think I'm 35 minutes south of where you're working, maybe 40. And Hank is about the same distance, like, especially if you get back to in person, but most certainly if you're doing virtual, anything we can do to support the chapter and help you bring it back to a very thriving and maybe even small chapter of the year award winner again, would be happy to chip in. Hank probably knows a lot more about making chapters successful than I do, but I've played a small part in the past. And I also want to thank you for being part of the Beyond Clean Advisory Group, because that's a group of very special individuals who have lots of insights and can share those insights with, the companies and other folks that are driving the industry forward and entrepreneurs and getting good intel so that we get what we need in this industry. So I wanted to thank you for both of those things, but most importantly for sharing your insight today. Great job.
Yep. Thank you guys. Thank you very much. And I do want to also say thank you for letting me be part of the Beyond Clean Advisory Group, because that is actually, me and Hank have talked a little bit outside of here, and it's helped me grow quite a bit in sterile processing. Just being able to get my voice out there, like I said, I'm not the most experienced one out there, but I've seen a lot, and I like to think that I'm learning a lot too. So thank you guys.
That's a big part of it, is being an ongoing learner. You can't know everything, and there's always new stuff coming down the pike, especially in this industry. As a matter of fact, that comes on the heels of us talking a little bit about ST91 with Mary Ann Trosnock, speaking of lots coming down the pike. So great job again, and very happy and proud to have you on the Beyond Clean Advisory team. That was Ken Batton, educator at Penn State Health, president of CASP and Beyond Clean Advisory Group member. Really great interview. We had him pinch hit at the last minute too. I just put that out there. We've done that a few times, Hank, and it always seems to work out. Reach out to somebody that has been active on social media, that we know is very engaged with the brand, and then give them an opportunity to come on the show. Ken did a phenomenal job. Love seeing people, not only be educators and have educator positions, but also taking leadership roles even when they're not in a management role. And I just want to say to everybody out there, that's kind of an exemplary kind of move there, that as an educator moving into a presidency of a local chapter. That's really what it needs to be. Think about if you're a manager now, or even a supervisor, definitely as a director, your time extra at the job really starts to eat away at your ability to commit to a local chapter. Educators are perfect for presidents, for local HSPA chapters. So, Ken, glad you stepped up to fill a void. Two people that were involved in that chapter, Nestor Hernandez, a past guest, and Matt Frederick, also a close friend. So both of them moved out of the Pennsylvania area. And so lots of people still involved with the chapter and keeping it going, and Ken stepping up. We talked about chemicals, but what made this episode so interesting, Hank, was we were really talking about it in terms of best practices to make sure that new technicians, especially, not only know those best practices, for chemical usage, but are prepared for priority number one is employee safety. Yes, patient safety is the one that we put at the top of that pillar, it seems like all the time. But if you don't have employees, you don't have patient safety. And so we have to take care of the people, especially when we talk about the workforce shortage that's going on these days.
Yeah, if we can't get them in, the ones we get in, the least we owe them is to protect them from harm and from these chemicals. Because I think as been said on David Hilliker's episode, and maybe even the one that we did with Peggy Spitzer, all these chemicals are created to kill living organisms, one of which is us. Like, we are a living organism, and all these things are made to kill us. Well, to kill things like us. So totally. And I just want to add back to your other point of, Ken coming on the show, a super humble guy, like he always says, well, I'm only 6 years in. And I had to remind him the other day, there's a large percentage of our industry, Ken, that is under 6 years. You're talking about a very new workforce coming in to sterile processing over the last couple of years. And so it's not about how much time you've served. That's the old way of thinking. The new way of thinking is, how passionate are you? How driven are you? How willing are you to sacrifice and commit to learning the industry and pouring back into the industry, such as this chapter leadership, coming on the show with Beyond Clean, all that great stuff that Ken's already doing and tons of folks out there are doing. So I just want to give a shout out to everybody out there who's 6 years or less in sterile processing. Like, be proud, because you are already making a difference, and the best is yet to come.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's show. But as a reminder, you can help support Beyond Clean, but you got to subscribe to us on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. If you use Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, you can find us there, or just search for Beyond Clean Podcast on your favorite podcast application. We also have bonus content. That's for certain episodes, but you won't get it unless you download the smartphone app for iPhone and Android. And hey, while you're there on the marketplace, we'd certainly appreciate a rating and review, because your feedback is important to Hank, myself, and the entire team at Beyond Clean. And finally, you hear a lot of great topics on these shows, but if you have any that you feel like is missing, or you would like to hear from a different perspective, all you have to do is send us an email to info@beyondclean.net with your topic suggestion. On behalf of Hank and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean.